Welcome to Stab the Dragon Productions and an American Catechism, a systematic Americanology for the wide-awake citizen. This is episode 3, Why Study American History? Today is Friday, the 25th of April, 2025. In Genesis 10, Moses gives us the origins of the nations. And then in Genesis 12, God promises to make a great nation out of Abram. In 1 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 31, David sings, "Let them say among the nations, the Lord reigns." Jesus commissions his church in Matthew 28:19, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations." It seems to me that God has had a plan for the nations from the beginning to the end, from Genesis to Revelation. Revelation 21:26. They will bring into it the glory and honor of the nations. Last time we looked at the question, why study history? In a very general and theological way. Now let's narrow the focus a bit and ask, why should we study American history? Sadly, I've encountered many Christians and pastors who do not care for America in the least as a nation. There's a hatred for America out there in both the godless left and also in the Christian right. Oddly as that sounds, I encountered that just this last week at my church, specifically amongst Reformed Southern Baptists in my experience. This is displayed as an apathy or even an antipathy towards American history, politics, particularly MAGA politics, or economics. It is my belief that if you live in America, Christian or non-Christian, you should have a love and respect for America and a desire to study its history fairly and honestly, with the goals being to understand our past, to see what God has wrought in this country, expressing thanks to God for the blessings of living in America, and to help us build a future that enables Americans to flourish and honor God. God, in His providence, has placed you in America for His glory, your good, and hopefully so that you can positively impact others around you in the city, state, and nation with the gospel and other good works. Paul writes in 1 Thessalonians 5:18, "Give thanks in all circumstances." Even the circumstance of being born in America? Certainly. I believe that anyone who objectively and fairly looks at the history and condition of America should rejoice that they were born here or got here as soon as they could. One way to show gratitude to God for His providentially placing you here is to learn about this nation. First, what is a nation? A nation is a political and geographical group of people who are related by family, race, heritage, history, language, culture, religion, ideology, and are self-aware of their being a nation and are recognized by other nations as such. Some nations are small and relatively simple to define through ethnicity and geography, while others, like America, are large and complex with many ethnic groups, many religions, and a complex heritage due to massive immigration through the centuries. America had a very clear beginning as a nation in 1776 and wrote a formal constitution in 1789 and has been identified as a nation and recognized as such by the world community ever since. Ethnically, our founding was primarily by the British, with the original colonies being comprised of Anglo-Saxons, Scots-Irish, and Germans with some Dutch and French tossed in. Religiously, we were overwhelmingly Protestant Christians, with a tiny minority of Roman Catholics. English was the national language, but there were certainly French, German, and Dutch being spoken in places as well. Our ideology was formed from British common law, combining with the frontier experience, Puritanism, Calvinism, a touch of the French Enlightenment, classical Greek and Roman thought and culture with the political philosophies of Locke, Burke, Montesquieu, Adam Smith, as well as others. America's founding is considered unique and revolutionary in world history, with the amount of freedom it granted the common man compared to all the nations of Europe. It was a radical break with the political and social past in Europe. America has expanded from those original 13 coastal colonies, and now we have an entire continent bounded by the Pacific on the west and the Atlantic to the east, the Gulf of America to the southeast, Mexico to our southwest, and Canada on our north. So yes, America is a nation. However, we are a nation with some serious problems, many of which have arisen because we have neglected to care for and protect those very basic things I listed above that make us a nation. Things like borders, religion, language, ideology and heritage, history have all been corrupted. Hence, this American Catechism project. Why study American history? Because we are a part of this nation. God has placed us here. We should be giving God thanks for this opportunity. When you study world history and the state of the world today, and then compare the world with American history and the blessings of liberty, prosperity, opportunity, and honor that we have here, we ought to be rejoicing and giving thanks to God for our uniqueness, our prosperity, our freedom, and opportunities. Immigrants from all over the world risk everything to try to come to America, more than to any other country. Why is that? It's easy to complain about the different failures of America currently. We are not perfect. It is easier still to look back at our history and criticize those who have gone before, or those who founded our nation. But I maintain that there is much more to be proud of and thankful for if you give our history just a fair chance. This doesn't mean we should ignore our failures. We must study our failures and use a critical eye with sound judgment to look at every sin and failure, to look at our successes and see what the costs were. But in doing so, do not become jaded, hypercritical, and fail to look at and proclaim the good that permeates the whole. There is much good in our history, much that is exciting, and much that can be contributing to our progress today. As a citizen of America, you are expected to obey the laws, pay the taxes, vote intelligently, serve on juries, and contribute to the overall culture in a positive way. In order to do those things well, you have to know some of the history of the nation. When immigrants begin the process of becoming naturalized citizens, they must study and prepare to take a test that covers the English language, our civics, our politics, which includes some history, the political process, the Constitution. And this test is rigorous and has been shown to be a serious challenge for native-born citizens who've graduated from our public schools. Imagine that. The average native-born citizen simply doesn't know that much about our history, geography, Constitution, or how the political system works. But they can tell you all about their favorite rap musician, their favorite actor, their sports heroes, and this is sadly even true in the churches. This ignorance of our history and politics, geography, religion, lends itself to those who want to lead voters astray into bad ideologies. This is the origin of many harmful, wicked government policies, practices, and laws. These harmful policies have devastating effects in real life. The open borders policy of the Biden administration in the early 2020s led to a surge in crimes, drugs, and sex trafficking, and all the expenses of caring for the illegal immigrants that were soaking up tax dollars. It was passed down to the taxpayer, ballooned our budget up, deficits out the wazoo, almost to the point of bankrupting the nation. Ideas have consequences. Ignorance has consequences. A better understanding of American history can help solve these problems. President Barack Obama famously campaigned on bringing fundamental change to America because he did not love or respect our national heritage, history, and religion and wanted to remake America into a Marxist country. Love and pride in our nation is needed for the defense of the nation. Serving in the military is always a dangerous occupation. Peacetime training is rigorous and accidents happen. Wartime service leads to many dying in combat or coming home wounded, broken, disabled. Who volunteers for that kind of danger? Those who know of the greatness of America, have a love and respect for her, and take pride in defending her? If through constant negative teaching in our schools and universities, bad entertainment in movies and TV, bad preaching and teaching in the churches, and extremely bad political leadership, the youth of our country lose heart and no longer have a love or pride in America. Recruitment, then, into the armed forces declines, as was demonstrated in the 2020s. When the military becomes politicized and is used for social engineering by leftists, the military declines. The national defense is therefore weakened, and the overall morale of the nation is weakened. When schools no longer teach flag etiquette, they quit saying the Pledge of Allegiance every day, fail to teach the patriotic songs, traditions, and stories of our past, then our young people grow up in a multicultural environment without a natural love of country. Add into that mix the many schools and teachers who teach a very negative view of America with divisive ideologies that emphasizes race, gender, and sexual perversion, and you get a generation or two that actively hate America. And we can see that the first couple of months of the Trump administration, recruitment in the military is surprisingly up, breaking records. Imagine that. The church is also partly to blame here, as many pastors only speak of America's sins and problems and never the blessings and successes. Many pastors have a leftist ideology that colors their preaching, turning the hearts of their congregation against God, the gospel, and America. But even in many conservative Bible-believing churches, it's increasingly common to not display the American flag in churches and not to celebrate or even mention the patriotic holidays like Memorial Day, Independence Day, or Veterans Day. Many pastors who are gospel-centered constantly disparage America, practicing the fallacy of moral equivalency when speaking of the left and right. On the one hand, we do not want a Christian nationalism that is a yes man to the political system. We need to keep a prophetic voice and a witness to the state. But on the other hand, we want to recognize the God-given blessings that come through America and return thanks while teaching our young a biblical view of patriotism. It's normal in healthy families for the generations to see things differently, to go their own way, but at times the younger generation has questions that only the older generation can answer. Frequently, a younger generation will rebel against the beliefs and standards of their parents, but as they age, they come around to appreciate the wisdom and experience of their parents that they once thought knew nothing. So too in American history. The succeeding generations will chart their own course, go off on tangents, even disavowing the founders. But when times get tough and new ways prove themselves to be faulty, there's a tendency to go back to the previous generations of America and find wisdom. Practically speaking, we need to know our history to face the problems of today. Part of the problem with studying American history is that from the founding of our nation by the Vikings and the first explorers, the conquistadors, the Pilgrims, Puritans, and the founding fathers, there was a conscious and deliberate effort to escape the past, break the chains of traditions and rulers that were oppressive, to forge a new path ahead in the wilderness and start something new. From our origins to the present day, Americans have been innovators, inventors, always seeking to get ahead and always dreaming about tomorrow. The 1977 Charles Strauss and Martin Charnin song Tomorrow from the Broadway musical Annie, based on the 1924 comic strip by Andrea McArdle, is about the hopes of an orphan girl who longs for what tomorrow may bring. Heartwarming story. This is a typically American kind of a song. The downside to this breaking with the past and the optimistic view of tomorrow is that we can sometimes devalue our past and neglect the study of American history and even forget it. The teaching of American history and the history of Western civilization has been neglected in our colleges and universities and high schools since the end of World War II. By the mid-1960s, the chance of "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Western Civ has got to go," permeated the campus, the college campuses, the protests, the universities, and so they all acquiesced to the radical agenda. And soon colleges stopped requiring students to take courses in American history or, or civics, and then women's studies, gay and lesbian studies, or human sexuality studies became the replacement. The history classes which were offered were increasingly slanted with leftist agenda. Over the decades, history departments began shrinking, fewer students took degrees in history, and teacher colleges required less of a core curriculum and focused on teaching methodologies and administration, etc. The public school textbook industry was assailed from both the left and the right, and all kinds of special interest groups, so that the textbooks for American history gradually became less and less meaty, less readable or enjoyable, and much more broad and banal, boring to students. The writings of communist Howard Zinn took off in popularity with his communist view of history, A People's History of the United States, coming out in 1980 and achieving massive sales numbers as a college and high school history text. And this last week, I actually had an elder in a conservative church tell me he loved Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States, that he thought it was on target. In 2019, you got the 1619 Project by the New York Times, and the pseudo-history makes the main point of American history to be slavery. And it warps everything else to conform to this blatantly anti-American diatribe that promotes an anti-white bias and divides the country. If we do not know, appreciate, and promote our history in an accurate, positive manner, not neglecting the sinful episodes, not neglecting the failures, there are many others who will gladly downplay, distort, and misuse our history for their own evil intents. There is war against American history. The battlegrounds are the public schools, the universities, Hollywood, Washington, D.C., and even the churches. Remaining neutral is not an option. If the church does not encourage a biblical view of our nation, a biblical view of being grateful to God for our nation, then our youth will be corrupted by apathy towards America. For an American Catechism, this is Stab the Dragon, out here.